the throne inside your head. You do not walk into a room first. Your mind does. Before you speak, people already feel something about you. Not from your clothes, not from your face, not from the way you stand. They feel whether you are centered or scattered. They feel whether you are grounded or hungry for approval. They feel whether your emotions are under command or waiting for the room to decide what you become. Most men never notice this. They think presence is about looking confident, speaking louder, standing taller, wearing the right expression. But presence is deeper than that. Presence is what happens when nothing inside you is begging for permission. A king does not enter a room asking to be accepted. He arrives already seated within himself. That is the difference. A weak man enters a room with invisible questions running through his mind. Do they like me? Do they respect me? Am I being ignored? Did I say the wrong thing? Do I look weak? Are they judging me? He may smile. He may speak boldly. He may act calm. But underneath that performance, his mind is kneeling. And people feel it. They may not be able to explain why, but they feel when a man is internally controlled by the room. They feel when his attention is scattered. They feel when his emotional state depends on how others respond to him. They feel when one look, one pause, one cold tone, or one small disrespect can pull him out of himself. That is not presence. That is exposure. Machiavelli understood something most people still avoid. Power begins with control. Not control over others first. Control over yourself. Because if you cannot govern your own mind, every person with access to your triggers becomes a quiet ruler over you. Praise can lead you. Criticism can break you. Silence can make you chase. Disrespect can make you reckless. Misunderstanding can make you explain yourself until your dignity is gone. And once people know what moves you, they know how to move you. This is why controlling your mind and emotions like a king is not motivational advice. It is strategy. It is protection. It is the inner architecture of a man who refuses to be ruled from the outside. A king can feel anger, but anger does not write his laws. He can feel fear, but fear does not choose his direction. He can feel desire, but desire does not make him desperate. He can feel pain, but pain does not become his identity. He feels, but he does not kneel. That is the first rule. Most people misunderstand control. They think control means becoming cold, feeling nothing, showing nothing, needing nothing. But that is often not strength. It is fear wearing armor. A king is not empty. He is ordered. Inside him, thoughts still rise, emotions still move, old memories still return, old wounds still speak, but none of them automatically takes the throne. They must be examined. They must be questioned. They must prove they deserve action. Most men do not do this. They feel something and call it truth. They feel anger and call it justice. They feel jealousy and call it intuition. They feel fear and call it wisdom. They feel insecurity and call it realism. They feel the need to explain themselves and call it honesty. But a king asks a colder question. Is this truth, or is this an old wound trying to rule again? That question is where power begins. Because the world does not need to defeat you if your own mind is already doing the work. It only needs to touch the right insecurity. Delay one reply. Question your worth. Ignore your effort. Laugh at your ambition. Speak to you in a tone that wakes something you never learned to govern. Then you move. Not because you chose to, because you were triggered. And a triggered man is predictable. A predictable man is manageable. A manageable man is not a king. So the first lesson is simple but brutal. Your mind is either your throne room or your prison. If you do not sit there with discipline, something else will. Fear will sit there. Anger will sit there. The need for approval will sit there. The memory of someone who hurt you will sit there. The opinion of people who have never built anything will sit there. And you will call it your personality. No, it is occupation. A king takes the throne back. Not with noise, with awareness. He begins by noticing the moment before reaction. The tightening in the chest, the heat in the face, the urge to answer, the story forming in the mind, the ego preparing its defense, the old wound pretending to be a command. That moment is small, but it is where kingdoms are lost, and it is where they are reclaimed. A king does not wait for the room to become peaceful before he becomes steady. Ordinary men need the environment to behave before they can control themselves. They need people to speak correctly, respond quickly, respect them openly, treat them fairly. But that means their peace is rented. A king owns his peace. He carries it into the room before the room offers anything back. That is why his presence feels different. Not louder, not more aggressive, not more dramatic, just unmoved. His mind is not a public hallway where every opinion can walk in. His emotional state is not a chair anyone can sit in. His attention is not a throne for strangers, critics, lovers, rivals, or memories. He guards the inner court, because whoever controls that court controls the man. And if you want to carry yourself like a king, this is where it starts. Not with your voice, not with your posture, not with how others see you, with the throne inside your head. Your emotions are fast, not always true. Your emotions feel powerful because they arrive fast. That does not mean they are right. This is where most men lose themselves. They mistake speed for truth. The first thing they feel becomes the first thing they obey. Anger rises, so they speak. Fear rises, so they retreat. Jealousy rises, so they accuse. Insecurity rises, so they chase reassurance. They do not pause long enough to ask whether the feeling deserves authority. A king does. He understands that the first emotional wave is usually about survival. It wants relief. It wants release. It wants to discharge pressure. It wants to speak, strike, chase, explain, disappear, or prove something immediately. But relief and respect are not the same thing. Sometimes, the thing that feels good for 10 seconds destroys the dignity you spent years trying to build. That is why emotional control is painful. It asks you to let the emotion rise without letting it rule. It asks you to feel the heat and keep your hand away from the weapon. It asks you to hear the ego begging for action and still remain still enough to choose. That silence between feeling and action is not weakness. It is where power is made. Most men do not reach that place because they are addicted to immediate relief. They want the pressure gone now. They want the message sent now. They want the argument won now. They want the wound answered now. So they react. And then they call it honesty. But honesty without command becomes chaos. You can say what you feel and still betray yourself. You can express your emotions and still lose your position. You can be real and still become easy to manipulate. A king knows this. He does not worship expression. He values command. The emotion is not the enemy. Anger can show you a boundary. Fear can show you risk. Sadness can show you what mattered. Jealousy can show you a desire you have not admitted. Anxiety can show you uncertainty your mind wants to control. But emotions are messengers. They are not rulers. They bring information. They do not get the crown. This is where the weak mind fails. It says, I feel it, so it must be true. A king says, I feel it, so I must examine it. That difference changes everything. Because the mind is a storyteller, it does not simply feel pain. It explains pain. It does not simply feel silence. It interprets silence. It does not simply feel rejection. It turns rejection into identity. Someone does not reply, and the mind says, you do not matter. Someone criticizes you, and the mind says, you are being attacked. Someone succeeds ahead of you, and the mind says, you are falling behind. Someone pulls away, and the mind says, you are about to be abandoned. The body feels, the mind interprets, the ego panics. Then the man reacts. This is why control begins with interpretation. If you do not control the meaning your mind creates, you will never control the emotion that follows. You will spend your life fighting storms that began as sentences inside your own head. A king interrupts the sentence. He asks, what else could this mean? He asks, is this danger or discomfort? He asks, is this dignity or ego? He asks, what would I do if I did not need to prove anything? That last question is dangerous, because many reactions are not born from strength. They are born from the need to appear strong. A man raises his voice because silence makes him feel powerless. He overexplains because being misunderstood feels like losing status. He sends the desperate message because absence feels like rejection. He acts unbothered because he is deeply bothered and wants witnesses for the performance. This is not control. It is emotional theater. A king does not perform stability. He builds it, and he builds it in the pause. The pause between insult and answer. The pause between fear and decision. The pause between emotion and movement. Most men skip that pause because the pause is uncomfortable. It forces them to sit with the raw feeling before turning it into action. It forces them to meet themselves without distraction. It forces them to admit that the enemy is not always the person in front of them. Sometimes the enemy is the part of themselves that cannot wait to surrender. That is the real battlefield. Not the room. Not the comment. Not the relationship. Not the argument. The battlefield is the inner second, where you either obey the emotion or return to the throne. This is why discipline must become faster than emotion, not louder, faster. The emotional reaction will always arrive first. You cannot always stop that, but you can train a second force inside yourself, a colder force, a higher force, a force that says, wait, do not hand over the crown yet. At first, that force is weak. It whispers, but every time you listen to it, it becomes stronger. Every time you do not answer from anger, it becomes stronger. Every time you do not chase from fear, it becomes stronger. Every time you do not explain from insecurity, it becomes stronger. Eventually, it stops whispering. It commands. That is when your emotions stop feeling like kings. They become what they were always meant to be, signals. And a signal can guide you, but it should never govern you. The man who cannot be baited. A man who can be baited can be controlled. This is one of the coldest truths of power. It does not matter how intelligent he is. It does not matter how strong he looks. It does not matter how much money he has, how much he knows, or how many people admire him. If the right sentence from the right person can pull him out of himself, he is not free. He is managed, not by chains, by triggers. People do not always need to overpower you. Sometimes they only need to activate you. They do not need to win the war. They only need to make you move at the wrong time, speak from the wrong place, reveal too much, or damage your own position. That is why emotional control is strategic, not soft, not decorative. Strategic. Machiavelli saw human beings clearly. He understood that people are not moved only by reason. They are moved by fear, pride, hunger, insecurity, ambition, envy, loyalty, and self-interest. That does not mean every person is evil. It means every person is human, and human nature loves leverage. If someone discovers that disrespect makes you reckless, they may use disrespect. If they discover that silence makes you chase, they may use silence. If they discover that criticism makes you explain yourself, they may use criticism. If they discover that guilt makes you abandon your boundaries, they may use guilt. If they discover that praise makes you obedient, they may use praise. This is why your reactions are information. Every time you explode, you reveal where anger rules. Every time you overexplain, you reveal where approval rules. Every time you chase, you reveal where fear rules. Every time you perform confidence, you reveal where insecurity is hiding. Most men reveal the map and then complain that people keep finding the door. A king closes the map. He does not become fake. He becomes selective. He does not hide because he is weak. He guards because access is expensive. His inner state is not public property. His emotional wounds are not material for careless hands. He listens. He watches. He lets the room speak first. This is where silence becomes powerful. Not because silence is magical by itself, but because silence protects the space between emotion and exposure. It prevents the first emotional version of you from making decisions the wiser version must repair later. Silence gives the king time to return. The weak man cannot bear that silence. He fills it. He explains. He defends. He corrects. He proves. He confesses his inner movement without realizing it. And people learn him. They learn what tone makes him defensive. They learn what absence makes him anxious. They learn what praise makes him flexible. They learn what criticism makes him desperate. Then they no longer need to guess. They can play him. A king refuses to be played. He understands that presence is not just confidence. Presence is the absence of emotional leakage. It is what people feel when they cannot easily locate your desperation. They may sense depth, but not neediness. They may sense strength, but not performance. They may sense feeling, but not surrender. That kind of presence changes rooms, because most people are emotionally loud even when they are quiet. Their faces confess. Their timing confesses. Their posture confesses. Their need to respond confesses. Their inability to sit in uncertainty confesses. A king trains himself not to confess without choosing. This does not mean he becomes lifeless. It means he becomes intentional. There is a difference between being unreadable and being empty. The empty man has nothing inside. The unreadable man has discipline between the inside and the outside. He chooses what leaves him. He chooses when. He chooses why. That choice is power, and power grows through repetition. Every reaction is a vote. Every time you obey impulse, you vote for the version of yourself that can be controlled. Every time you pause, observe, and choose, you vote for the version of yourself that carries authority. At first, no one sees these votes, but eventually, Everyone feels the result. They feel it when you no longer rush to defend yourself. They feel it when you do not collapse because you were misunderstood. They feel it when your energy does not beg to be received. They feel it when disrespect no longer gets the performance it came for. That is when the bait loses value. A person who wanted your reaction receives your stillness. A person who wanted your anger receives your distance. A person who wanted your insecurity receives your clarity. A person who wanted to pull you down to their level finds no opening. This makes people uncomfortable. Let it. People addicted to reaction often call discipline cold because your restraint exposes their chaos. They call your silence pride because your silence denies them control. They call your calm weakness because they cannot imagine strength without noise. A king does not explain discipline to people who profit from his reaction. He remains difficult to move. That is enough. The most dangerous people in your life are not always the loud enemies. Sometimes they are the quiet observers who learn your emotional patterns. They learn what makes you defensive. They learn what makes you jealous, anxious, guilty, or desperate. Then they do not need force. They only need timing. One sentence at the wrong moment can make an undisciplined man destroy his own position. So a king studies himself before others can use him against himself. He audits his own reactions like a ruler checking the weak points in a castle wall. Where do I become too eager? Where do I become too emotional? Where do I need approval too badly? Where do I confuse attention with respect? These questions are not soft, they are military. Because whatever you refuse to examine in yourself eventually becomes leverage in someone else's hands. The hidden fear beneath every reaction. The deepest reason most men cannot control their emotions is not anger. It is self-distrust. They do not trust themselves to stay steady when life becomes uncertain. They do not trust themselves to survive rejection without collapsing. They do not trust themselves to be misunderstood without chasing explanation. They do not trust themselves to sit with discomfort without reaching for noise, attention, control, or distraction. So they try to control the world. They try to control how people see them. They try to control how quickly someone replies. They try to control whether they are respected, remembered, desired, forgiven, admired, or chosen. But that is not power. That is panic wearing armor. A king understands this. A ruler who cannot govern his own territory becomes obsessed with every border. He becomes suspicious, reactive, and easily threatened. Not always because the enemy is strong, but because the center is weak. The same happens inside a man. If you do not trust your worth, every rejection becomes a verdict. If you do not trust your discipline, every temptation becomes a threat. If you do not trust your emotional strength, every silence from another person becomes a trial. If you do not trust your direction, every opinion becomes a possible command. That is why internal control must come before external strategy. A man who trusts himself does not need constant proof from the world. He does not need every room to accept him. He does not need every person to understand him. He does not need every emotion to disappear before he moves with dignity. He has evidence. Evidence is different from affirmation. Affirmation says, I am strong, while the life behind it remains weak. Evidence says, I stayed silent when reaction was easier. I walked away when ego wanted to stay. I kept my standard when comfort begged me to lower it. I felt the emotion and did not become its servant. That kind of evidence builds the fortress. Every kept promise becomes a stone. Every restrained reaction becomes a stone. Every clear decision under pressure becomes a stone. Every time you refuse to betray your standards for temporary relief, another stone locks into place. Eventually, the fortress holds. And when it holds, the world no longer enters you so easily. The insult may still arrive, but it does not sit on the throne. The rejection may still sting, but it does not rewrite your identity. The pressure may still tighten, but it does not make you abandon your code. The fear may still speak, but it no longer sounds like law. This is emotional maturity, not softness, not fake positivity, not pretending to be above pain. It is the ability to remain loyal to your higher self while the lower self is begging for relief. That is the hidden war beneath every reaction. One part of you wants dignity, another part wants comfort, one part wants silence, another part wants revenge, one part wants to build, another part wants to escape, one part wants command, another part wants to be rescued. Human nature is not clean. It is divided. A king is not the man without division. He is the man who knows which part of himself deserves the throne. This is why emotional control feels difficult. You are not simply controlling anger or fear. You are deciding which version of you becomes stronger through repetition. the desperate version, or the disciplined one, the wounded version, or the sovereign one, the reactive version, or the king. Each moment chooses. That sentence irritates people because it removes their favorite hiding place. It means your emotions may not be your fault, but your repeated obedience to them becomes your training. You may not choose the first feeling, but you train the second move. You may not choose the wound that gets touched, but you choose whether to turn that wound into a weapon, a performance, a prison, or a teacher. A king chooses the teacher, because every emotion carries intelligence, but only discipline can translate it. Anger may show you where a boundary exists. Fear may show you where preparation is needed. Jealousy may show you where desire has been buried. Sadness may show you what still matters. But if you obey these emotions without translation, they become rulers instead of messengers. And messengers make terrible kings. This is where many men mistake intensity for truth. They think because an emotion feels strong, it must be important. But some of the strongest emotions are old wounds, using new situations as costumes. A king learns to recognize the costume. He does not ask only, "What am I feeling?" He asks, "How old is this feeling?" Because sometimes the reaction is not about the present. It is about a memory that still wants revenge. It is about a humiliation that never became wisdom. It is about a rejection that trained the mind to panic whenever distance appears. This is why the king must enter the hidden room, not to hate what he finds there, to govern it. Self-trust is not built by thinking highly of yourself. It is built by watching yourself. Keep command when command is difficult. A man does not begin to trust himself because he repeats powerful lines in the mirror. He begins to trust himself when he sees proof. He sees himself not answering when the old version would have exploded. He sees himself walking away when the old version would have begged. He sees himself staying consistent when the old version would have negotiated with weakness. That proof changes the body. The nervous system begins to learn. I can survive discomfort. I can survive silence. I can survive being misunderstood. I can survive not being chosen. Once a man learns that, the world loses one of its greatest weapons against him. He no longer treats emotional pain like a death sentence. He treats it like pressure, and pressure can forge him. The paradox of control. Here is the paradox. The harder a man tries to look in control, the less control he often has. This is why some men become obsessed with appearing unbothered. They speak in cold lines. They delay replies like a tactic. They avoid vulnerability. They punish with silence. They act mysterious, not because they are composed, but because they are terrified that honesty will reveal need. That is not kingship. That is fear with better posture. A king does not need to perform control, because control is already present. He does not need to prove he is calm. He simply refuses to be dragged. He does not need to make others feel small. He simply does not abandon his own size. There is a difference. Many men confuse emotional control with emotional dominance. They want to be the one who cares less, responds slower, reveals less, and seems harder to affect. But sometimes that is not discipline. Sometimes it is just a wounded person trying to win by becoming unreachable. The world is full of men who call avoidance power. They leave first so they cannot be left. They act cold so they cannot be seen wanting. They dismiss people before they can be dismissed. They say they are focused, but they are actually afraid of emotional uncertainty. A king must be more honest than that. Because if your control depends on never being touched, then you are not controlled. You are protected by distance. If your peace depends on never caring, then it is not peace, it is numbness. If your strength depends on never feeling fear, then fear still owns you from the shadows. Real control is tested by contact. Can you care without becoming dependent? Can you feel anger without becoming destructive? Can you want something without becoming desperate? Can you be hurt without becoming cruel? Can you be misunderstood without begging to be corrected? That is the standard, not coldness, command. The king controls his emotions best when he stops needing to prove he has none. He lets the emotion appear. He names it. He takes its information. Then he decides from the highest part of himself, not the loudest part. This is difficult because it requires two kinds of strength, the strength to feel and the strength not to obey. Without the first, you become numb. Without the second, you become chaotic. Most men choose one side and call it wisdom. They either drown in emotion or exile it. They either react or repress. They either chase or detach. They either beg for validation or pretend they need no one. But the king walks through the middle, open enough to feel, closed enough to protect his center, clear enough to know the difference. This balance is rare because it requires humility. You must admit when you are hurt. You must admit when your ego is involved. You must admit when your silence is not wisdom but punishment. You must admit when your detachment is not peace, but fear of needing someone. That honesty is uncomfortable, but without it, control becomes another mask. And every mask eventually demands payment. The payment is distance from yourself. You begin acting like the man you want others to believe you are, while the real emotional life inside you becomes neglected, resentful, and unseen. You start performing strength so often that you lose the ability to know when you are actually bleeding. A king cannot afford that. He needs truth more than image. Because image is fragile, truth is usable. If he is angry, he wants to know why. If he is afraid, he wants to know what is at risk. If he is jealous, he wants to know what desire has been ignored. If he is hurt, he wants to know what expectation was broken. He does not let emotions rule, but he does not waste the intelligence hidden inside them. There is a false version of control that many men worship. It looks like power from a distance, but up close it is only avoidance. It refuses to feel. It refuses to need. It refuses to care. It turns every relationship into a battlefield and every moment of honesty into a threat. This man thinks he has mastered emotion because he has buried it so deeply no one can see it. But buried emotion still governs from underground. A king is not afraid of what moves inside him. He is not ashamed that he can be affected. He is only committed to not being ruled. That is a higher form of strength. Coldness is easy. Distance is easy. Numbness is easy. The real test is staying open without becoming weak, staying calm without becoming dead, and staying powerful without becoming cruel. This is why control must become a code, not a mood. A mood says, I am calm today. A code says, even if I am not calm, I will not betray myself. A mood changes when the world changes. A code holds when the weather turns violent. A mood depends on sleep, praise, comfort, and conditions. A code remains when the room is cold, the message is unanswered, the pressure is high, and the ego wants to make a scene. That is the king's law. And when that law becomes stronger than impulse, your presence changes. You stop rushing. You stop defending everything. You stop making emotional announcements. You stop offering your inner world to people who only came to inspect your wounds. Your words become fewer. Your absence becomes cleaner. Your decisions become heavier. Not because you are trying to look powerful, because you are no longer leaking power. That is the difference between a man performing control and a man who has become it, the king who cannot be moved. In the end, controlling your mind and emotions like a king is not about winning every moment. It is about no longer losing yourself inside them. That is the payoff most people miss. They think control means never being hurt, never being angry, never doubting, never needing anyone, never feeling the old wound open again. No, that would not make you a king. It would make you imaginary. A real king feels the weight of the crown. He feels pressure. He feels loneliness. He feels the temptation to answer fools, chase approval, punish disrespect, and prove his worth to people who were never qualified to measure it. But he does not obey every feeling. That is the final line between the ruled man and the ruling man. The ruled man says, this emotion is strong, so I must act. The ruling man says, this emotion is strong, so I must become still. Stillness is not emptiness. It is command gathering itself. It is the mind returning to the throne before the mouth speaks, before the body moves, before the message is sent, before the bridge is burned, before dignity is traded for temporary relief. This is why the king becomes difficult to manipulate, not because he knows every tactic, but because he refuses to let people use his own emotions against him. They can provoke, but they cannot easily possess. They can criticize, but they cannot easily define. They can withdraw, but they cannot easily collapse him. They can misunderstand, but they cannot make him beg to be seen. He has returned to himself, and a man who has returned to himself is dangerous in the quietest way. He does not need to announce growth. The absence of reaction announces it. He does not need to prove strength. The restraint proves it. He does not need to chase respect. His command makes disrespect feel expensive. This is where the title becomes complete. To control your mind and emotions like a king is to become the man whose inner world is no longer governed by every outer event. It is to stop letting temporary feelings make permanent decisions. It is to stop turning wounds into laws. It is to stop confusing impulse with honesty, suppression with strength, and performance with power. It is to sit on the throne inside yourself and remain there. even when anger knocks, even when fear speaks, even when loneliness returns, even when the old version of you begs to take over. You do not destroy that old version by hating it. You outgrow it by refusing to crown it again. That is the work, quiet, unseen, repeated, uncomfortable. No applause comes when you do not react. No one celebrates the message you did not send. No one praises the argument you refused to enter. No one sees the storm you held inside without letting it poison the room. But you see it, and that is enough. Because every unseen act of control becomes part of your presence. Every private victory becomes public gravity. Every time you choose command over impulse, the man you are building becomes harder to shake. One day, people will say you changed. They will be wrong. You returned to the throne, returned to command, returned to the part of you that was always meant to rule the noise, not kneel before it. And this is what Machiavelli would understand better than most modern men. The world does not respect the man who is always explaining his pain. It studies him, it learns him, it uses him. But the man who has mastered the inner court becomes something else entirely. He becomes hard to read, hard to bait, hard to own, hard to break. Not because he has no emotion, because emotion no longer has the crown. That is the final code. Guard your mind like a kingdom. Study your emotions like messengers. Let silence protect what noise would expose. Let discipline translate what pain tries to command. Let every trigger become proof that there is still territory inside you worth ruling. At the highest level, control becomes quiet. You do not need to prove anything anymore. You do not need to react to show strength. You do not need to speak to defend yourself. You do not need to chase to feel important. Because nothing inside you is begging for control. You already have it. That is why a king becomes hard to move. Not because nothing touches him, but because nothing stays long enough to control him. He feels it, sees it, understands it, and lets it pass without giving it the crown. The world can still test him, but it can no longer easily take him. The throne was never outside you. It was waiting in silence,